Kristen, and this is the Simple Handmade Everyday podcast where I talk about living a creative, intentional life. I like to chat about quilting, knitting, what I'm reading and watching, and even a little bit about keeping a cozy, organized home. You can find me on my blog, Simple Handmade Everyday, at kristenesser.com, and on Instagram at kristenesser. I've got my cup of tea in hand, so let's settle in for a chat. Welcome to episode 4. I have no idea what I'll call this podcast. That seems to be the hardest part of podcasting for me, is naming the episodes, believe it or not. But I'm sitting here with my cup of tea. I have it's a tea bag. I need to order some more loose leaf tea. Is what I need to do. I want some Darjeeling from Harney & Sons. That's my favorite, and I haven't had it for a while. This is, see if I can say this, I always mess it up, traditional medicinals, organic chamomile and lavender. Kind of not my thing. I'm not really into non-caffeinated tea, but I've been a little jittery lately, so I thought I would try this that we actually purchased when we picked my daughter Chloe up from school last June, and we were moving her out of her dorm, and she still had about $40 of dining dollars left. So we went to the little school market, and I bought a bunch of tea, and we bought smoothies and portable shopping bags, just anything we could do to get our money's worth for those dining dollars. So I'm enjoying it. It's not my normal tea, but I will take it for today. Maybe I will be a little less jittery on the podcast here. So welcome back if you've listened to previous episodes, and welcome if this is your first one. Last episode, I begged a little bit for some ratings and reviews on iTunes, and some people came through, so thank you very much. Here, I want to acknowledge them. Runs with Tutu, thank you very much. Fittest Knitter, and I don't know how to say this, so I'm going to say BKS for LOU. Something for Lou. So thank you so much. And then I think there's a couple other ratings, but they don't affiliate names with them. I love reading iTunes names. I think mine is probably Kristen Esser. I am like the most boring username everywhere. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I encourage others of you to go on to iTunes, give me a rating or a review, because it just really helps. So thank you so much. I very much appreciate it. So with that out of the way, let's just jump into what's on my cutting table, quilting-wise. I have been feeling very uninspired quilting-wise for a little while now. I kind of had a big year last year where I made a lot of quilts, kind of one after another, and even my family was like, do you usually make this many quilts? I'm like, no, not usually. I just, I had a really good run with it. And, these kinds of things, they just have peaks and valleys, and I've kind of been uninspired, couldn't find my quilting mojo, and it's been kind of bumming me out. So that's why I've really kind of been diving into knitting lately, because that is just kind of where my creative energy was leading me. But I tackled a project this weekend that has kind of turned things around for me a little bit. And that project is I made myself a design wall. So I sew in the dining room, which I'm actually sitting at right now. This is a different podcast location, so I'm checking the sound in this location. I hope it's going to be okay, because it's a little bit of a nicer environment to podcast in, because I can see all my my projects around me. A few years ago, we built a loft over it because we have musicians in this house and the musical instruments were everywhere. So we built a loft to contain all that. And what that did is create a little bit of a drop ceiling over the dining room. And that got rid of the space that I used to hang a piece of batting that was my design wall, and I'm saying that with little quotes. It would hang off the stairs, and that's it was where I put my blocks, and it worked very well for me, and I could take it down if people were coming over. But I haven't had that for 6 years now or something. And so I jokingly say I don't have a design wall, I have a design floor. I just put that same piece of batting on the floor and I lay my blocks out, and then when I need to put it away, I just roll it up and put it away. Well, in the same way that blocks stick to batting the way you want them to, when you roll it up, it's going to stick on both sides and they would come off, and all these very carefully pressed blocks would then get wrinkled. It was not a good situation. And so laying out a quilt and then getting it sewn up was kind of an ordeal, and I just did not enjoy it. So I have seen people make portable design walls before, and Frances over at the Off Kilter Quilt has talked about hers several times using a piece of foam insulation board from the hardware store, and I think hers is wrapped in flannel. I have a lot of batting. I use warm natural batting. I've got a huge roll of it, so that is the easiest thing for me to use. And I've been thinking about it for years, but my problem is that I didn't know where to put it. It's portable, but we're kind of maxed out in this house. So then I realized that I could slide it behind the china cabinet, because again, I'm in the dining room. I could have it out when I needed it. I could slide it behind the china cabinet, which I was thinking this design board would be about 1/2 inch thick. I head over to this hardware store out on just a series of errands called Osh, and it turns out, because I thought all hardware stores are the same, right? It's very much, it seems like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, but they did not know what I was talking about. And I was really struggling because I don't want to tell them what I want it for, because I think it sounds kind of weird. But as I'm trying to explain this, my husband looks it up on the Lowe's website and shows the guy this, and he goes, "Oh yeah, we don't have that." I'm like, okay. So over the weekend, we were at this jazz festival for both my sons compete in jazz, and we had some time to kill. And I'm like, there is a Home Depot across the street. Let's go check that out. So we go there, and I do find, again, it takes a lot of explaining in some pretty cryptic terms to get what I want. They lead me over to this area, and they do have the foam. They're calling it foam insulation, but it's not rigid. It's kind of floppy. And he's like, "Are you sure that's what you want?" But the price was right, meaning it's like a 4x8 sheet that is about $8. I mean, it's so affordable. And so he said, "Well, there's this, and it's this other kind of insulation board, also lightweight, but it's definitely firmer. It was 1 inch thick, and it's covered in like that sort of, looks like aluminum foil, like silver. So it's like this true insulation stuff. But it's like $20 a sheet, which again, still very cheap. But I was like, oh, I don't know. And then he goes, there's a biff on the corner of this one. I could knock $10 off. And we were like, sold. So we had them cut it down to 7 feet. So it's 7 feet by 4 feet. My china cabinet's around a little over 7 feet. So I'm thinking I'll slide it behind. So I'm going to make a tutorial for the blog, but all I really did was bring it home, cut some batting to size, and I was gonna staple it on the back with a staple gun, and lo and behold, we were out of staples. So not to be deterred, I just pulled the duct tape out, and I duct taped it, just wrapped it around and duct taped it, and it's not perfect because batting does stretch a little bit, so there's some kind of, I'm looking at it right now, some kind of poofy areas where I could probably pull that a little tighter, but done. Okay, so that was great. So I lean it up against the china cabinet, which is right near my sewing table, and I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do with this? Well, a while back, in a effort to get my sewing mojo back, I made some string quilt blocks, and I did a little video on how to do a string quilt block, which I'll link to in the show notes, but it's just, super fun, happy sewing without really a plan. It was a lot of fun. But I had these blocks, but I had not sewn them into a quilt because I was dreading laying them all out. And actually, I had meant to sew them into a quilt top so that when I did that last machine quilting blog hop with Angela Walter's book, I was going to actually practice on a real quilt. Well, I never got it together in time, and they've just been sitting there. And so I laid them out. And the reason why I thought about just sewing them together without any kind of a plan, but they do kind of come together, 4 corners, and I'm kind of a stickler about planned randomness. I don't want two red things to meet. I like things to be a little bit more separated, which my husband likes to tell me is not true randomness. But it took me 5 minutes to lay them out. Now, 4 feet across is not as wide as you really need for most quilts, at least the quilts that I make. But this whole thing was an experiment, and it's fine. So there, some of the blocks are dangling off the side, but that's fine. It's all fine. And so I started this design wall at about 3:30 on Sunday afternoon, where I pull out my big roll of batting and I start making it. And I had that quilt top done by about 8 o'clock that night. It was like this, it was so fun. I just got me over the stumbling block of just rediscovering how much I like to just sew. And it was the perfect thing because, it was just sewing blocks together. And my string blocks do have a strip of white diagonally through the middle of them to kind of break up the madness of the rest of the quilt, which was made with flour sugar by, I never know how to say it, I think it's Lucien. And so at first I tried to really make sure that those met at nice points, and that really was not working for me. So I just decided to embrace perfection, and these blocks are all trimmed to size, so that it should work. And so I didn't really worry about the little white corners coming together perfectly. It's so chaotic that nobody would ever notice anyway. So I was so excited. So I gave that a good press, and I think what I'm going to do is set it aside and book some time on the long arm. I learned to long arm about a year ago, and I've only, other than the 4-hour original lesson that I had, I've only done it one other time. So I want to go and kind of get that skill going. And now I've got a pretty decent quilt top to just practice with. That it was like made from a jelly roll that I had in my stash. So it was really, a very minor investment. So once I pressed that and folded it and put away, still Sunday night, I pull out the pineapple quilt blocks, which I've mentioned before that I've been working on. So all 9 blocks have pineapples and leaves, and I have blanket stitch appliqued the pineapples down with this variegated sort of rainbow thread. And what I need to do next is stitch down the leaves. And there's a lot of leaves on, 13 leaves, and there's 9 blocks. And the pattern called for zigzagging them with monofilament thread. And I can kind of see why. But my monofilament thread, which I do have some, but I couldn't find the end. And as I was picking at it to find it, it was a mess, and I just threw it in the trash. And I went to my local quilt shop, Cotton and Chocolate, to go buy some more monofilament. So I get there, I pick out all 4 that they have, I bring it to the table and said, can we talk about this? And the woman who helped me, I don't know her name, but she's so helpful, she said, I've made this quilt, I've made this block. I'm like, well, tell me how you did this. She said, well, number 1, I did not use monofilament because it's shiny and I don't like it. And I said, well, what did you do? So she used variegated green and just did a blanket stitch around each leaf, and they overlap a lot. So I'm a little worried about how that's going to work out. And I didn't really want to break thread that often, but she said she did. She just did each leaf and broke thread and then sewed the next one. So with the blanket stitch, I'm a little worried about locking my stitches. When I did it around the pineapple, I actually left long tails and I tied them in knots by hand, which is not something I do very often. But I think what I can do is once I stitch around one leaf with a blanket stitch, then I can switch back to a regular stitch and then just sort of do a couple small stitches to lock it. It's going to be a lot of programming numbers into my machine, but I think it'll be worth it. But it's why I haven't started that. But that's okay because I got all 9 blocks laid out on my new design wall, and then I started on the borders, which is, really getting more to what I want to do. It's a bunch of half square triangles, and I was doing them with the 8 at a time method, which goes so fast. And so now I've got all the border blocks done, but I can't sew them together until I actually do the applique on the leaves. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm not going to say I'm stuck because I am making so much more progress than I have in so long. What's funny is that neither one of these quilts are really my style, but they are the projects that I had on hand that sort of getting me sort of over the hump of my quilting malaise. And before I sort of got over the hump with my quilting, I actually sewed a little sock knitting, a project bag they call it. Actually, I think I put my mittens in it. I made a little project bag with a zipper. It's super cute. It's the wide open pouch, I think it's called. I'll link to it. It's from Noodlehead, and it's really cute. And I happen to have a bunch of old zippers that from my mom's quilting stash, and you need a really long one. And I had exactly one 20-inch zipper, and It's super cute. I'll show you a picture of it. I kind of messed up installing the zipper, so the part of the zipper is a little, frayed, which I think I'm just going to do some visible mending on it and just take a little piece of fabric and fold it over and stitch it down, because every time I see it, it bugs me. But it's just the perfect size little knitting bag. So that was another thing to just help me to remember that, you know what, you really do like to sew. Speaking of knitting, I've got a few things on the needles. I am the slowest and perhaps worst knitter ever. But let me tell you what I've got going. First of all, while searching for some needles that I needed, I uncovered a sweater that I had started knitting. I think I mentioned that I'd never knitted a sweater before. Turns out it's not really true. Number one, I knitted a Weasley sweater from Charmed Knits back when my kids were all really into Harry Potter. And so I did this green Weasley sweater for Jonah and did the duplicate stitch with the letter J on it. It was very cute. And then years ago, I cast on this sweater for me called Tea Leaves. I'm pretty sure that Soul Mama knit it, and there was a time I just kind of wanted to do everything she did, not so much anymore. But it is a sweater that is very much me. In fact, my sister-in-law Megan once sent me a pin on Pinterest of that sweater in this "you should knit this" kind of way, and I already had it on the needle, so it's clearly very me. It's in kind of a mushroomy brown color because I am nothing if not a neutrals girl, and this has been on the needles for so long that I'm up and down in my weight. So I waited till I was like a size I was happy with before I cast it on, and then I started knitting it, and then I gained weight, so I kind of put it away, and then I lost weight, so I started knitting it again, but then now I've gained weight, so it's not really going to fit me. So it has followed the ups and downs. At this point, I feel like I should finish it and give it to my daughter, Chloe. But when I pulled it out, I was shocked because the whole body is done. One sleeve is 3/4 done, and then there's just one other sleeve after that. So I had no idea I was so far along. I also completely did not know that I had begun knitting it in the magic loop style, which I thought that I had never done. I've got some memory problems. As a matter of fact, when I first started knitting on it, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. How am I doing this with this long cable? Until I realized, oh, this is magic loop. And then I had to watch a video to remind myself how to knit magic loop. So anyway, so I'm kind of working on that. I'm kind of thinking that this really, I might just give it to Chloe when she comes home. Oh, actually, she'll be home later this week. I'm going to have her try it on and see if it's something that she would like. She needs knitted things for when she goes to Norway, and then I can just count that as the first one that's done. So that's on the needles, and I was very excited to rediscover that. And I think that last podcast, which is 2 weeks ago, this is so sad, I had just cast on this pair of vanilla socks with this colorway that I was calling Neapolitan. And you want to know the funny thing about that is when I finally looked at the tag, it's called Neapolitan. So clearly I'm not the only person who thought that. And yesterday I was down to like 12 stitches just on the toe. I was ready to just Kitchener it off. And then something happened and I dropped a stitch, and then I ripped back and to try to catch it, and long story long, I ripped all the way back to the foot. I'm like, I am the worst person for figuring out how to fix mistakes. And so anyways, whatever. It's all knitting. I like to knit socks, so it's fine. But I almost had one finished sock to tell you about, but now I don't. And it turns out when I bought that skein of it's Otis and Chloe Neapolitan fingering weight sock yarn when we were in Napa, I thought that one would be enough, and it's not. I kept looking at the skein going, how am I going to get another sock out of this? Well, you can't. So I've already ordered another one. Is already here. So I'm back on track. So I told you I seriously can't apparently figure out yardage or anything. And so the other one that's on my needles that I've talked about many times is these colorwork mittens that I'm knitting for Chloe. And I really got going on them. I worked the first chart, and I'm loving doing the colorwork, and I'm like so excited about that. I'm finally making progress on this. And then I try to put my hand in them, and they're really, really tight. And that's when I realized that you only knit the first like 4 rows with like a size 5 needle, and then you pop it back up to like a 7 for the rest. And I never changed my needle back to the larger size. So in great disgust, I just threw them back in that little project bag that I just made, and they are in timeout for right now. I'm also a little bit worried. They're red and white. And I feel like the red yarn, which is this Norwegian yarn, like so they're very traditional, is sort of, I don't know, I want to say bearding. If it were quilt batting, I'd call it bearding. It's fuzzing up on top of the white, which makes the white look kind of pink. And I'm a little dismayed about this. But I'm just going to go with it. But I was watching, I think it's called the Earth Tones Girl podcast. It's a video podcast on YouTube. And she also knit these mittens. And I think she did them kind of like a black and white or a navy and white. And she loved them so much, she cast on a red and white pair. And she's having the same issue. And so she kind of put that on timeout also. But I mean, red and white it's a very traditional combo. So I just feel like I should be able to get over this. But I just don't know how much more this yarn can take ripping back. So anyways, so those are my trials with knitting. So I'm glad I've rediscovered that I like quilting, because knitting is sort of getting on my nerves right now. But that's okay, because I've been enjoying knitting also vicariously through the show I talked about last week called Shetland, which I love. It's on Netflix. The first 3 seasons are on Netflix, and I found out that, in fact, there are 2 more seasons, but they're just not available here now. So that's kind of good to have something to look forward to. So in the meantime, I discovered that the show Broadchurch, I cannot get enough of these, UK type murder mysteries. Broadchurch has a season 3, which I had not watched. And I don't know if you've ever watched Broadchurch. It's a mystery. It's got David Tennant, and it's very good. It's a little darker than I usually go for. I feel like the murders or the cases can be a little bit more grisly. The first season, I had to sort of get over what the actual case was about before I could kind of enjoy the mystery part of it. But so that's what I've been watching while I've been sewing, and while I sewed together that string block quilt. I rediscovered Call the Midwife, which somehow I lost traction on in the middle of an episode in season 4. I found out as I clicked on it on Netflix. And that is the show that kept me company through, it took like 2.5 episodes to sew that quilt top together. And I got these new really nice wireless headphones for my birthday. I just had a birthday recently, and my family... and this is a total aside, but kind of upped my game with the podcasting equipment. I was borrowing everything from Jonah, the microphone and headphones and everything. And so they got me my own microphone and some nice headphones and a little filter, so your peas don't pop kind of thing on it, and this boom arm. So now I'm like all set up like an official podcaster. But anyway, so it's nice. I've got these headphones on and the laptop up on my sewing table, and I whizzed through a bunch of episodes of Call the Midwife, and kind of rediscovered that one too. I love rediscovering shows that I used to like but have somehow lost traction on. Book-wise, I'm struggling to find the thing that I loved as much as the Louise Penny series, but I've been told by several people that I completely trust that I need to read Wendell Berry. So I did check out Jayber Crow from the library, and then got sidetracked on some other things and have not really made any headway with it. But I'm looking forward to it because people that I really love and respect completely love this author. And I'm curious, have you read any Wendell Berry? I know he does essays and he does fiction. And so let me know if you're a fan. I don't really have a housekeeping, homemaking kind of segment today. I'm feeling honestly a little uninspired there as well. Spring is finally getting here, and I am getting the itch to get outside, and we kind of dig into the backyard literally at the first part of spring and replant and clean up and create a space that we really enjoy being in during the spring and summer, because it's Southern California. We spend a lot of time outside. but I'm just kind of not there yet. Spring's a little late, or winter is late in arriving here. We had a very warm December and January, and now that it's March and today is perhaps the first day of spring, it's going to rain and it's kind of cold, where we've just had a warm, dry winter, and now it's spring and we're getting the cold, rainy weather, and we'll take it. I'm not complaining, but it's kind of putting a damper on me feeling the whole spring cleaning bug. So I'm sure it'll hit me. It always does. So I'm just not going to worry about it. But I have been thinking a lot lately about habits. And I mentioned before, I've struggled with my weight. It's up and down. And I think that, managing your weight and your sleep and your exercise and how you're eating and all those kinds of things, these are all things that function much better if you can create habits for them, so that you can kind of get them on the rails and not make decisions about what you're doing and whether you're going to go for that walk today, and all those sorts of things that you can tell yourself stories about to get out of it. So I came across something on the internet and about creating a habit checklist. Now, I listen to a lot of Gretchen Rubin. I've read The Happiness Project, Happier at Home, Better Than Before. I've listened to her podcast. I'm sure you probably know who she is. But if you don't, there'll be links, because you should totally check her out. She can be, kind of life transforming, because she's all about learning about yourself, learning how to be a better person and work within your own natural tendencies. So I created this little habit tracker just in an Excel spreadsheet, and I printed it out and I washi taped it into my bullet journal of the things that I want to make sure that I'm doing every day. And they will be different for you, but for me, I have devotions, take my vitamins, eat on plan. I eat this sort of sugar-free, low-carbish type of eating plan. Exercise for at least 10 minutes, which I usually do more, but the idea of the 10 minutes is that it's a very achievable goal, so that even on a day that it's raining or whatever, there's something that I can do for 10 minutes. Stretch for 10 minutes, which I kind of took this list from somewhere else, and that was kind of a new one. I mean, I've gone through periods of time of doing yoga and stuff, and I love it, but I have not made time for that for a while, so I thought I'd put that on there. That's the one that's proving to be the hardest to keep, to be honest with you. To sleep 7 hours, drink 64 ounces of water. There is one of them that's called well-being, and it's just taking time, 10 minutes, to do something that feeds your soul. For me, that's really easy, because that's sewing or knitting or reading. So that one, I think there's a lot of people that don't really take time for themselves, and I am not one of those people. I make sure I have, at this point in my life anyways, and I don't have small children anymore, but I make time to do the things for me. And I'm glad that that's a barrier that I've gotten over. And then the last one is to reflect, to journal about what's working and what's not. And so I haven't been doing this for that long. I'm just almost a week here. And so I have little check marks in the boxes, the things I've done, and there's more empty check boxes than I wish there were. But I'm going to keep this going and see how many streaks I can get going. I was reminded of this Jerry Seinfeld quote where he talked about writing a joke a day. This was advice to a comedian. And if you can just write one joke a day and you put an X on the calendar, and you just see how long you can get that string going. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish here by having this checklist. And this is a pretty, it's a well-established method of doing this. I believe Benjamin Franklin talks about creating a habits checklist. So if there's some things that you want to do, you want to make sure. And another reason this works for me is that I forget. There's a lot of stuff going on in life, and I forget the things that make me happy. I like to journal, and I feel like I'm kind of a happier person when I do that, but I forget to do it very frequently. So just having that little checklist and seeing it every day, going, yep, I need to sit down and do that. So I hope that's helpful in some way to you. I'll kind of keep you updated, and if I can really get some really good long-term strings going on these things. That's it for this episode. Thanks for spending this time with me. I hope that you were able to do something fun, whether it was sit and do some handwork or sew, or if you took me along on your morning run, whatever it is. Thanks so much for spending this time with me. It means a lot to me. Leave comments to let me know what you think. Let me know you're listening. Any feedback you have about what you're sewing, what you're knitting, what's working in your life. That type of thing. I would love to hear it, and I will see you next time.